The twin cataclysms are an event of enormous significance in the world of Greyhawk, and yet we know next to nothing about them. I want to talk about it today on Greyhawk Grognard. So, the twin cataclysms, the Invoked Devastation and the Reign of Colorless Fire, are such evocative names, and somehow we don't know much more about them other than those names. Um, we first learned about it in the original folio, and then it was carried over into the gold box. And it was the ending of a series of wars between the Sulois Imperium and the Baklunish Empire. These are the two big nations to the west of the Flanaess in the prehistory of the campaign setting. And these wars were happening for several hundred years between the two empires, and they were using humanoid mercenaries, and they were driving the Iridian tribes to the east through all the fighting and everything. But at the very end, we learned this. When the invoked devastation came upon the Baklunish, their own magi brought down the rain of colorless fire in a last terrible curse, and this so affected the Sulois Empire as to cause it to become the Sea of Dust. Meanwhile, sufficient numbers of the Baklunish remained to hold the northern plains to maintain their small states against all comers, Euros, High Jeblik, Jebli, Kilbit, and other such humanoids alike. For 2 centuries, the Orid and Sul battled each other and the fragmenting humanoid hordes for possession of the central area of the Flanaess. So after this twin cataclysm, these two magically invoked disasters, all of the tribes started to migrate from here into the Flanaess, into this way, right? So you have the Baklunish and the Iridians are coming here over the mountains and into the Flanaess. The Sulois are kind of down that way. No, I can't do it, but you know what I mean. They're in the lower left of your screen in the Sea of Dust, and they all come east because of these wars and because of these invoked devastations and the Reign of Colorless Fire. Now, one of the great things I love about the folio that you don't unfortunately see elsewhere is this beautiful picture by Earl Otis showing the reign of colorless fire, the last night of the Sulois Imperium. I just thought I always love that picture. It just shows it's just so perfect. Um, and what a lot of people, it's easy not to realize just how young the Flanaess is, because the Twin Cataclysms only happened less than 1,000 years ago in terms of the setting itself, right? So I think it's 997 years before the current year of 576. That's when these things happen. So in the course of under 1,000 years, you have these tribes migrating eastward and setting up all these kingdoms. And then in that intervening time, the kingdoms themselves expanded and collapsed and so forth. So there's a lot of history packed into those 1,000 years. And this fits in with something I've talked about in other videos, where the history of the Flanaess is kind of mirroring the history of Europe. If you see the invoked devastation and reign of colorless fire as the fall of Rome, then the 1,000 years from there kind of brings you into the 13th century, which is kind of a neat little 14th century, which is kind of a neat way of judging where the Flanaess should be technologically, if you view things in those ways. Now we do have a few other things. I mean, these two events are mentioned all over the place. But we don't really get a description of them in too many places. They did. They added a little bit in the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. They said that the Baklunish went to Torvag Bagru to do the Invoked Devastation. I'm sorry, the Reign of Colorless Fire. So there's a little bit of extra detail, but nothing really about the thing. In one of the Dragon magazine, Dragon 350, in a article about Wijas, the Sul goddess of magic and death, we read that there's a kind of a heretical view that says that because she was so angered by the Sulois mages in bringing down the invoked devastation upon the Baklunish, that she caused their magical defenses to fail when the Baklunish retaliated with the Rain of Colorless Fire. And most of the followers of Ouijas don't agree with this, don't believe it. But there's like this heretical sect that does believe it, which is kind of a neat little thing.
A ghoul leaps out and attacks you. What do?
I use my staff of thunder and lightning and blast it. Do thy worst, freak.
Explore the role-playing game where fantasy comes to life with magic, monsters, and endless options. Adventures Dark and Deep. Available now at adventuresdarkanddeep.com.
One of the few other pieces of information that we have comes not from a setting book, but from the Monster Manual 2 in the Hordling entry, which is kind of interesting. Um, um, the Hordlings are these random creatures from Hades and Tartarus and so forth. And the only known method of drawing more than one Hordling to the prime material plane is the Bringer of Doom, a strange device created by arcane magic during the Invoked Devastation. See the World of Greyhawk set and now lost. And that's I think very very interesting too, because you notice it's not saying that it was created to bring about the invoked devastation or whatever. It was created during the invoked devastation. So while that invoked devastation happened, um, the mages of the Baklunish had at least one of them had the presence of mind to take that magical energy and use it to forge this device that creates a gateway to Hades to bring in these creatures. So that's a neat little thing if you take the wording literally. Um, and one of the things that's interesting to realize is that we have this um, these two great empires, right? And one of them, the Baklunish, as you can see here, there's a number of Baklunish kingdoms. There's the nomadic Paynims here and so forth, and that was all one big unified empire at one point. And the invoked devastation, we don't really know what its nature was. Was it earthquakes? Was it something else? We don't know. Was it hordlings? You know, but we have no indication of what it actually the nature of it was. But it was enough to completely wipe out their political structures and their civilization, if not their culture, because the survivors were able to flee northwards and create these new kingdoms that we see up here. The reign of colorless fire, on the other hand, was much more destructive, and in fact, we do have an account of it and how it affected the Sulois in Gary Gygax's novel Sea of Death, which takes place in the Sea of Dust, and this is on page 129. Um, long ago, two great empires fought a war of mutual annihilation. One empire, the Baklunish, was fractured and made backwards, and the land of this race was turned arid and poor. To this day, the Bakluni are not a nation anymore, but a collection of tribes that contest with each other for the dubious privilege of controlling the harsh, featureless lands of the western part of the Floness. People of the Second Empire, however, suffered even more when the Bakluni retaliatory strike came. Their fair land was scathed by a magically created storm of fire, colorless flames that consumed all life. When all was done, virtually all of the once mighty Second Empire, known as the Sulois, was covered in a layer of dust and fine ashes. Gray and lifeless, wind-driven and parched, this covering of ruin blanketed the land for 1,000 and more miles in every direction from its center. Indeed, it stretched like water across the landscape, and the area became known around the continent of Orc as the Ashen Desert. When the invisible firestorm finally ended, all who viewed this seemingly endless vista of dust and ash, a gray-black desert born of destruction, assumed that nothing could live in such a place. Of course, they were quite mistaken. And then he goes on to to talk about how the Sulois mages were able to survive under the dust and so forth, and that's feeds into the novel. But that's not really germane to this thing. And I can't remember the reference, but I did read somewhere, might have even been another place in Sea of Dust, that the fire itself burned hills and mountains to flatness. So in the area that is now the Sea of Dust, there were actually mountains and geography and everything, and it all just got burned to ash. The very mountains and hills were turned into ash. And I think that's just such a wonderful, evocative uh, uh, scene that he paints. And of course, it's very obvious that this was it's kind of a restatement of the threat of nuclear war in the real world, because obviously when this was all being written and created, it was in the 70s. It was the height of the Cold War. Nuclear war, and I think the use of the word retaliatory strike is very deliberately using the terminology of nuclear war in order to describe these cataclysms. So we have these two great things, and the effect on the history of the Flores, especially, is immediate. Because you have these devastations. The Sulois, the Iridians, they begin their great migrations eastward across the Flores, and they create the great kingdoms that we know now. Erdi, Nyrond, Kaoland, and so forth. The barbarian tribes that make it all the way up here are almost pure Sulois. We have those great maps of the migrations that we get in here, showing where all the different tribes and everything went. So that one event forms the basis of the history of the Flores, and without it, we wouldn't have it. We would still just have these two big empires constantly at war with each other. But it was that out of the destruction of the twin cataclysms comes this great flourishing of culture and life and history in the Flores as those survivors make their way eastward. So I think it's just a wonderful myth, a foundational myth of the Flores, that the Flores' culture comes out of the twin cataclysms. I love that idea, and it also, of course, brings in the something else that we've talked about on this channel, which is the idea of of Greyhawk as, in its own way, being a post-apocalyptic setting. In this case, the apocalypse isn't necessarily technological, and we don't really have any clear indication other than a few artifacts, which I've talked about in another video. We have these technological artifacts that come from, if not that era, then even farther in the past. But we do have this idea that in their own minds, in their own mass psychology, their view of their own history, that they are a post-apocalyptic culture, because they are the inheritors of these great empires, of the Sulois, especially, and the Iridian tribes that were also up there. But they have that legacy, sort of, and you see that a lot especially with the Scarlet Brotherhood, which is actively trying to recreate that, and they see themselves as the inheritors, and that's driving a lot of the politics of the current era in 576. So it is an event that casts a long shadow over the Flores, and I really think that seeing that historically as analogous with the fall of Rome in Europe, and everybody is trying to regain those lofty heights that Rome had, in the same way that we get the idea that the Flores cultures, especially the Iridians and the Sulois, are fall down quite a bit after the invoked devastation and Reign of Colorless fire, and they slowly make their way up to the same level where we see them today after 1,000 years of history. So anyway, like I say, I wish there was a lot more detail about these, but I love the fact that there isn't, because that gives the DM room to just put in all the details as needed for his own campaign. And that's always the best way to do things, in my opinion, in terms of designing a setting, is that you throw in these things. They don't have to be exhaustively detailed and exhaustively explained and analyzed. You can save those as mysteries for the DM to solve for his own players. And I think that's really the best legacy that the twin cataclysms can follow. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Let me know. I'm sure I missed some things in Dragon Magazine or somewhere. Please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Hope you're all having a wonderful day, and stay safe from Hordlings. Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store, where you can buy my books, and my blog, where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.